Hi and welcome to my first guide since the PVE updates in Secrets of the Obscure. An incredible update actually. All DPS classes have been squished together quite nicely. We're seeing a lot more competitive builds coming out in terms of, every class has kind of got a build that's sort of going towards a decent landmark. Most of them are squished between say like 38 to like 44k DPS, which is really good. It's really good to see that there's so many competitive classes. All the supports are looking fairly decent. I think some are performing a little bit better than others. But yeah, my first guide back is going to be on the Berserker. A couple of people have been requesting Warrior, and I think that the Berserker is in a fairly good spot right now. But there are one or two things to have a look at. Well, let's have a look at why this class is just so damn good. And for the pros, Warrior's rotation is fairly simple, making it quite a nice class for newer players to learn, especially ones wanting to get into harder content in raiding, strikes and fractals. Warrior has a lot of access to CC. If you take certain weapons, Warrior can basically top most CC charts. Warrior also has a large amount of max targets on most skills. This means that you can cleave quite a lot of targets while just doing your normal rotation. Or if you're on world bosses and things like that that have multiple hitboxes, you'll probably be hitting more than one hitbox, meaning you'll do more damage than most other classes. And of course, there's going to be a few cons. First of all, I'd say the major drawback is that Warrior has no access to range damage. This means that while there are phases or mechanics around the boss that could deal damage to you or downstate you, you cannot be doing DPS compared to something like a Virtuoso or something like this, making it kind of a bit of a big con. It also lacks a lot of extra utility. Yes, it has lots of CC, but it doesn't have as many other mechanics like pulls and pushes that a lot of other classes want. There are a few, and we will get into those in the utilities. But I would say the biggest drawback is basically just that there are skills on Berserker that extend their Berserk, i.e. their big damage dealing window. And if you do not use these skills correctly, or if you miss them, you can basically nerf your own DPS quite substantially. So as a newer player, you might catch yourself not doing it correctly, but as you get more advanced, it will become a lot easier because it becomes part of your rotation and you've got the idea of when to use these skills. Now let's have a look at our gear and stats. For gear, we're going all Berserkers except for 3 pieces. Your helmet and your 2 accessories should be Assassins. This will help us get to 60% crit chance, which is what this build runs on. We want Rune of the Scholar because this is going to be the best output for damage. If you do have something like Rune of the Dragon Hunter, it's not the worst thing in the world, but Rune of the Scholar is doing a little bit more. For top DPS, we want Axe and an offset a Greatsword. This will help us get the highest benchmark possible. However, there are a lot of options. Even if you run something with Axe, you'll still do a fair amount of DPS, probably around the 40-41k mark, as opposed to the 43 plus k mark. So that's not the worst thing in the world, and I do recommend something like this for a newer player, getting used to the class first, and then moving towards the Axe Greatsword. However, also, by throwing in a mace, you have access to tons of CC if you put it in your offhand with your Tremor skill. Even with that being said, you can go Axe, Mace. This will give us access to a large amount of CC. And running this in certain fights like your Samrogs and your Gorsivals will probably help you top the CC charts. Now there can also be a case to run a longbow in certain fights, and especially in your open world environments, maybe where you want a bit of range CC. And also a shield is not the worst thing in the world, especially if you are in open world. But for raiding, generally, you'll either go for something with your axes and mace combinations, or your axes and your greatsword. Now for sigils, you will want yourself force on one of your axes and air on the other. I have impact because I used to use this a lot for fractals. And then for your greatsword, you will use force and hydromancy. If you do use something like the maces, obviously a sigil of paralyzation is fairly good. And for our relic, we will want Relic of the Thief. This is producing the highest DPS currently and is quite good. Now for food and utilities, you want to have a look with something with power and ferocity like the sweet and spicy butternut squash or any of the ascendant variants thereof. Obviously the one with crit heal is fairly good, or minus incoming damage. And for your utilities, you'll want the potent superior sharpening stones. These will give us the highest output for DPS. Now let's have a look at the traits and specializations. Our first specialization, Strength. Minor trait 1, Reckless Impact. At the exit of a dodge, we basically AoE foes and gain might. This can be quite good, but it's not part of our DPS rotation, but generally in raids and fractals, you are dodge rolling to avoid mechanics, and this just means a little bit of extra DPS while dodging. Now in column 1, we usually go for peak performance. What this does is increases your overall damage by 5%, as well as gives you a boon for 6 seconds when using a physical utility. Now we don't have any physical utilities in our base setup, but there are cases where we will use some of these. Minor trait 2, building momentum. Both skills give us endurance on hit, and this is fairly good, especially with skills like a F1, being able to get that extra endurance. Now in column 2, it looks like a close trade-off. Great fortitude is meta at the moment, gain vitality and ferocity based on your power, and that's quite a fair amount, especially for the extra survivability. Now this is why we do favor the Scholar runes over the Dragon Hunter runes, as well as obviously our potent sharpening stones. This gain here is massive. However, trait 2, Forceful Greatsword, is kind of an option you can consider. Extra power as well as the chance to gain might on crits and recharge on your greatsword skills. This is fairly good, especially if you're going to do more open world and you want to camp the greatsword more. And this is something you can consider, but the survivability and damage from Great Fortitude make it just a bit better for raiding and fractals. Minor trait 3, absolutely massive. Pinnacle of Strength might apply to you, gives you 10 extra power, as well as your crit chance being increased by 5%. Now in column 3, there's only one real option, Berserker's Power. Gain increased strike damage when we use a burst skill, so you can see that it's a 15-second buff, and also it tiers up based on your adrenaline state. Now, the reason why this is so good is because a lot of our skills, like our Decapitate and things, are a primal burst, so they will provide us with that damage increase. That is why this is so good, and you can't really pass it up. You can have a look at something like Might Makes Right if you are on open world and you do want a bit of healing. Comboing that with something like Forceful Greatsword, allowing you to basically gain quite a bit of healing just by generating that might. But other than that, Berserker's Power is just too strong a skill to give up. And specialization number 2, Discipline. Minor trait 1, Versatile Rage. When swapping weapons, we gain adrenaline only in combat, and notice the 4-second cooldown. And this is a massive trait. This trait allows us to basically keep on using our F1 skills, our Decapitates and such, to try and do a lot of DPS. In column 1, there's only one way to go, Warrior Sprint. Basically, when we wield melee weapons, we're moving 25% faster, we're dealing 10% increased damage when we have swiftness, as well our movement skills, break and mobilization. This is a massive skill, especially when doing certain mechanics. It allows you to move around a lot easier, as well as do some big DPS. The other two skills, Crack Shot and Vengeful Return, are obviously fairly good, especially in open world, but for raiding and fractals and the like, Warrior Sprint is just too good to pass up. Minor trait 2, Fast Hands. This is a massive skill. It allows you to swap weapons every 5 seconds as opposed to 10 seconds. This allows you to do so much DPS as well as rotation planning, as this allows you not to get stuck behind certain things. Like if you're running the axe, mace, you don't have to be stuck with 2 maces in your hands for a full 10 seconds. It allows you to swap, do some big CC, and get back to your axes and keep on doing some big DPS. In column 2, I would say there are 2 quite interesting options. Destruction of the Empowered. We deal increased strike damage to any target that we are attacking that has boons on it, and we get this increased damage per boon. So this means that in certain fights where targets tend to get boons, especially things like might and regen, we are going to pop off a little bit of extra DPS. However, Brawler's Recovery is not the worst skill in the world. This allows us to remove a condition on ourselves while swapping weapons, and because we have the 5-second weapon swap, that means that we kind of can rip off boons out of ourselves, especially in certain fights like your Dooms and your Slothazars, where maybe you don't want to have these conditions on you, or just help the healers just remove condies. Minor trait 3, Versatile Power. Basically gaining might when we weapon swap, and we can kind of keep up about 4 stacks of might on ourselves, so that makes it a bit easier for the boon givers. As well, burst skills gain reduced recharge. Now this isn't the worst thing when it comes to a skill like Decapitate, as it will recharge itself 100% if the skill hits. But when it comes to something like Arc Driver, we will obviously be gaining quite a bit via this minor trait. In column 3, there's only one way to go in my opinion, Axe Mastery. Gain ferocity as well as additional ferocity when wielding axes. Axe skills gain reduced recharge as well as grant adrenaline when critically striking. This is why the axe part of your rotation is quite big, and generally when you're out of berserk mode you will cap axe to try and obviously build up a lot more of this DPS. And now on to our elite specialization, Berserker. Minor trait 1 gives us access to Berserk and the Primal Rage. Now obviously you can see that the skill is affected by a lot of traits, especially ones in the Berserker trait line itself. But with the traits that we will pick, just know this: you will get quickness and super speed when activating the skill for the 3 seconds. You will gain 15% attack speed. We will gain 20% increased damage, and that is via skills inside of this tree. As well, we will have Berserk loss for 20 seconds. That's not base, but it's with the traits we have. It will give us some adrenaline and also access to our Primal Rage skills. These are skills that are quite massive. Generally, this is where a lot of our DPS is going to come from. Like skills like Decapitate, this is the one when you have an axe in your main hand. What this does is it allows you to gather strength for a massive attack, which will recharge itself 100% if the attack lands. So trying to make sure that all of your F1 skills land is paramount to making sure that you can do massive DPS. If you do for some reason miss a boss with a skill like this, it will nerf your DPS quite a bit. This will also give you tons of might because you are going to be using the skill so much in your Berserk window. On our Greatsword side, we'll use a skill called Arc Driver. This is also quite a massive damage dealing skill, and we will use this inside of our Greatsword rotation. Now in column 1, there is literally one choice, and it's Smash Brawler. This basically allows your Berserk to last longer, so i.e. that is why it is 20 seconds base rather than 15, because Smash Brawler increases it by 5 seconds. As well, it increases our crit chance in Berserk mode by 15%. So that is why we're aiming for 60% crit chance. Now if we use a skill that gives us Fury, you will see that our crit chance is only at 85%. That 15% is going to come from this trait when we are in Berserk mode. That means that when we are not in Berserk mode, we are not doing meta DPS because we're not critting every time. This means that being in Berserk mode is paramount to actually doing DPS. Minor trait 2, Burst of Aggression. This is where the quickness and the super speed is coming from when entering Berserk. Now in column 2, Blood Reaction is the way to go. We gain Ferocity based on our precision. Yes, we gain a little bit of condition damage, but that's not really the end or be all. There are a few interesting things to have a look at, maybe things like Dead or Alive or Open World or Heat the Soul. These can be interesting, but this is just way too good to pass up. And minor trait 3, Fatal Frenzy. This gives us 300 power as well as 300 condition damage when we're in Berserk mode. I.e. you can see that all of our damage is based around Berserk mode. And in column 3, there's only one way to go, Bloody Roar. This increases our strike damage by 20% as well as gives us resistance when entering Berserk mode. That 20% damage is while we're in Berserk mode, so as long as we can maintain Berserk mode for a long period of time, we're doing massive DPS. And you can see that in every single trait, we're based solely around our Berserk mode. Now let's have a look at our utility skills. For healing skill, Blood Reckoning is meta. It is a massive skill. You gain adrenaline, you gain recharge on all primal burst skills, i.e. your F1s and such in Berserk especially, and also you heal yourself percentage of outgoing damage. This is a massive skill as you need it in your DPS rotation. It's also another reason why Warrior is fairly tough to play, because you're using your heal skill for active DPS like a Chronomancer or something like this. There are a few other options that you can consider, especially for Condi Cleanse as well as absorbing incoming damage, especially if you know there are mechanics that are down in your group and you're not really going for DPS but more for survivability. But if you are a DPS greeder, Blood Reckoning is the way to go. And now for our non-negotiable utilities. Wild Blow, the first one, a crit hit skill that gives us Fury. It removes some Condis, as well gains us adrenaline and a massive CC knockdown, but this is AoE, so make sure that when you're using the skill, you're not knocking down a target that shouldn't be knocked down. I.e. if there's an ad that's trying to be controlled by one of your healers or your supports, try not to use this skill and grief them. But you kind of need to hit the skill almost off of cooldown, but it is part of a rotation, So you use it at certain points. But this skill is massive because the most important part of the skill, if you look closely, it increases the duration of Berserk by 4 seconds. This means that with Alacrity, this skill will be used every 15 seconds and you're getting 4 seconds back on your Berserk duration. That is massive because remember, we're only crit capped in Berserk. We're only gaining all that extra power and damage in Berserk. So to be able to extend Berserk is huge, and that is why the skill is non-negotiable, because we need it to extend Berserk duration. Your other non-negotiable utility is Outrage. This breaks the stun for yourself and extends the duration of Berserk, and is on a 10-second cooldown. Obviously with Alacrity that's going down to 7.5 seconds, but that is massive. Being able to break a stun as well as extend the duration of Berserk, this is going to help us, allow us to keep ourselves in Berserk mode so that we're doing massive DPS. Now generally what we do for our third utility is we use the Signet of Might. This improves our power by 180, but remember, even though that seems like a small amount, we do gain some things from power like Ferocity. So this amount here does equate to quite a fair amount of DPS, but if we do require another utility, this is the slot we will switch out, as we need Wild Blow and Outrage to try and maintain as much Berserk uptime as possible. Now other utilities that I do enjoy are things like Kick. Because of the knockback, this can be quite good for some fights like Samrog if you are in charge of dealing with the ads. Throw Bolus also for the Immobilize can be pretty massive. Notice that we are getting peak performance on all of these because they are physical skills, so we will get that extra 10% damage. Bull's Charge is massive CC. Generally this is what's taken in most fights where CC is required. Notice it also has an evade frame, so it can be used to obviously evade some attacks. Things like Shake It Off, massive, removing 3 conditions as well as stun breaking, not just yourself but allies as well. So both of them are for yourself and allies, and you have 2 counts on the skill. But if I were to give myself the biggest hot take, and we'll probably get this video ratioed, is to actually try and take yourself another rage skill, whether it's Shattering Blow or Sundering Leap. If you are a newer player, being able to extend the duration of Berserk a little bit longer so you can get used to the timing of how Berserk works. Now obviously this is not good and you shouldn't keep it in for the long run, but if you are a newer player, being able to have an extra rage skill like something like your Sundering Leap to gain an Aegis as well, and extend the duration of Berserk so that you can practice your Decapitation and your Arcane Slice timings. This can be fairly good, as well as having a skill like this, being able to move around, maybe getting over mechanics can be fairly good. And now for your elite utilities. Headbutt is meta. What this does is it stuns the target, stuns yourself funny enough, you gain adrenaline as well as extends the duration of Berserk, and that's probably the most important part. That is why a skill like Outrage is so important, because this breaks stuns. But this is an important skill because it extends the duration of Berserk. We're going to use this in our DPS rotation to do quite a fair amount of damage. Now there are some really good skills. Battle Standard, being able to revive down targets, especially in some pug raids, this can be absolutely massive. I think Signet of Rage is fairly good if you are on the open world, as well as Rampage on the open world, being able to basically take reduced damage as well as gain swiftness and stability. But yeah, Headbutt and I would say worst case scenario, Battle Standard, those are probably the 2 ways you want to look. Now let's have a look at our weapon skills. Our auto attack, great swing, great slice, and brutal strike on our greatsword are fairly high DPS as well as vulnerability. This can be quite massive in some fractal groups. Remember, vulnerability, especially in 5-man content, is quite hard to come by, so being able to provide it fairly good. Obviously, the last slice is huge. That 1.7 as opposed to the 9.24 is another reason why completing auto attack change is massive in terms of Guild Wars. Skill 2, 100 Blades. This allows you to do 8 strikes with a massive final strike. Notice it is also 3 targets. This skill is fairly good, but it will root you in place, so just be aware of that. Moving obviously will cancel the skill, and that's a massive DPS loss. Skill 3, Whirlwind Attack. This skill is a skill you won't really use unless you need some movement as well as an emote break. Using the skill will basically just fling you over, and it's kind of nice in certain encounters, raids and fractals to be able to move around quickly as well as get some evade frame. Skill 4, Blade Trail. This is pretty much your only ranged skill. It's pretty much just 1.7 damage and a little bit of soft CC. Remember, Cripple is soft CC. so being able to use that skill off of cooldown is quite decent. Skill 5, Rush, very similar to skill 3. Basically what this skill does is it will just yeet you forward and it takes you quite a far away, as well as obviously removes Immobilize. This is quite good to have, especially in fights like your Dooms, where you need to get to a green really quickly. Now for your axe rotation, your auto attack, just notice the second and the third hit do have a first and second component to them, so they are fairly big DPS, as well as 3 targets each. Cyclone Axe, massive skill, spin around, hit all targets, applying vulnerability for each hit as well as fury for each foe hit. This skill is also a world finisher. Skill 3, Throw Axe, our other ranged skill on our axe side. What this does is does a bit of normal damage as well as applies a cripple. Notice cripple is a soft CC, so it's not the worst thing in the world if a CC bar comes up to use a skill like this and just leave the cripple to tick. It also does bonus damage at below 50 and below 25% health. It also has 2 charges as well as it's a physical projectile combo finisher. Skill 4, Dual Strike. Basically, you hit with both weapons and you gain quickness for each strike hit. This skill does hit fairly hard. And skill 5, probably one of my favorite, Whirling Axes. Basically just spinning around like a soul beast, doing some massive DPS, but you actually get a movement speed increase while the skill's going. It's a combo world finisher. My favorite part of this skill is that you can just move around like a crazy person and just rub it in all the soul beast's face. And now for the toughest part of the guide, the rotation concept. Now, even though this is a fairly easy class to play with, a fairly easy rotation, when you play it, it kind of is whether or not you can maintain this berserk for a fairly high duration. Most importantly is to try get the opener correct. The opener will look like this. You will want to start inside of your greatsword. When inside of your greatsword, you basically want to be able to headbutt. So being in melee range as quickly as possible is fairly good. Now obviously the headbutt will yeet you forward a little bit, but it won't take you very far. Now what you want to do is headbutt, and while you're stunned, you want to activate your berserk and then outrage, but you almost need to do these so instantaneously that it almost happens in one motion. Now obviously, because we are initially using headbutt at the start of the fight, we are not going to get the increased duration on berserk from headbutt, but this will basically cap our adrenaline so that we can go straight into berserk. There's no really any easy way to go into berserk from the bat, so this is the easiest way, is to use headbutt to cap all of our adrenaline so that we can straight away go F2 and outrage to break the stun of the headbutt as well as extend the duration. That is kind of the concept, is while you're still stunned in that 1 second, you kind of got to use all these skills so that you're already flowing into it. Now obviously once you've used outrage, you will be capped on adrenaline already, so you'll use the F1 Arcane Slice from your greatsword and immediately switch over to your axe. Then even though with the weapon switch you will gain quite a bit of adrenaline, you will use Wild Blow so that you're getting more extension on berserk and to almost set the time and the momentum of your rotation. That will take you instantly and you will use Decapitate immediately. Then the concept is to kind of stay in axe as much as possible and use a skill like 2-3 Decapitate, 4-3 Decapitate, 5 let the entire skill channel and Decapitate. Now if you are only using axe, you can also use Blood Reckoning F1. So if you are using something just like your axe, what you will do is you will put the axes in opposite weapon sets. This will allow us to weapon swap, but we will stay with axe. Then you'll notice in your build that first of all we have fast hands, allowing us to weapon swap every 5 seconds, as well as gaining adrenaline on weapon swaps. So what this will do is it will help us when we don't have skills 2 to 5 or any of our utilities to auto attack, but also weapon swap to be able to get our Decapitate even quicker. However, when we have the greatsword attached to our rotation, we want to change our rotation slightly. What we want to do is basically get ourselves some full adrenaline, go into greatsword, use Arcane Slice, Blood Reckoning, Arcane Slice, skills 2, 4, and Arcane Slice, and then switch out. If you have to fill with a couple of auto attacks, that's fine. You know, whatever it takes in that 5 seconds, and go back into axe. Then because of the way we started our rotation, you'll notice that Headbutt is on a 20-second cooldown as well, Outrage on a 10-second. Obviously with Alacrity these will be shorter. What these will mean is that these two skills will line up every second use of Outrage. And that means you need to use Outrage almost off of cooldown to make sure that Headbutt can be stun broken with Outrage. Yes, you are wasting a little bit of adrenaline, but that doesn't matter. It's all about the extension of Berserk. That means that at one point of your rotation, you will decapitate, use Headbutt, break the stun with Outrage, decapitate, Wild Blows, decapitate, and then go back into whatever axe skills you need to and continue to decapitate. And that's pretty much the rotation. It's simple, but actually deceptively hard. Because of the timing of extending your duration of Berserk and the way that this class works, it has fairly high consistent DPS as long as you're in Berserk. It doesn't have the spikes and pulls like a Soul Beast, but it does require you to try make sure that these skills are being used. And like I said, if you are a newer player, you can kind of maybe try take another rage skill to make sure that you're not messing up with your Berserker timings. That's the way to kind of get the most out of this class. Playing axe and maybe keeping a mace on the offhand is not the worst thing in the world. Let me explain to you something like this. If you are in a fight like a Gorseville, where you know that only hard CCs affect the target, having the axe in your main hand still will still allow you to decapitate. That means that if you know that CC is coming up, make sure that you use all of your other skills, your 4s and your 5s, put them on a decent cooldown, switch over, hit yourself, your Tremor to do some massive CC. If you can, obviously sync it up with a Headbutt, but you're not stopping Headbutt and your Outrage rotation, right? But then, while you're stuck for that 5 seconds, you can still use Cyclone Axe and your Axe Throw to try and generate as much adrenaline as possible so that you can carry on to decapitation. And remember, at that point, you also have skills like Blood Reckoning to use for Decapitate because you do not have a Greatsword in this rotation. Obviously, having 2 maces is the highest CC you can get. What this will allow you to do then is to use skill 3, Pummel Bash, to get an extra 100 Defiance Break Bar as well as some Barrier. Now this isn't the worst thing in the world. As well, you do have access to weakness on your auto attack, so this can generate a little bit of soft CC. This combination obviously does quite a fair amount, and obviously if you need even more, using something like Bull's Charge gives you massive CC. And that's it. That's pretty much the guide. Warrior is an extremely fun class to play. It is one of the classes that you can take into Fractals, raiding strikes, and you can yellow bar everybody and laugh about it. But it does struggle in some groups where boon uptime is not good. If you don't have good Alacrity, you're not going to be able to maintain your Berserk well, and that means you are going to be in that period where you're not crit capped, you're not getting all that extra power and utility, and that means that you are going to be fairly nerfed. Now, if you are playing with more experienced groups, you can try and do as much DPS as possible and allow your Berserk to fall off during windows where DPS doesn't really matter. You know, say on Adina when you're running around, maybe taking down a couple of hands, it's not the worst thing in the world if you're not absolutely slapping. But you obviously want to try time it and make sure that you're in Berserk in the bigger DPS burst windows. And that's pretty much Warrior in a nutshell. An incredibly cool class to play, fun, and with tons of CC. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed the guide. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, thanks for watching anyway, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Before I cheers, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you so much. I'm pretty much almost on 1,000 subscribers. Maybe by the time this video comes out, that's pretty much happened. It's massive. It's actually more than I thought was going to happen in 6 months of trying to try and make some guides and help out, and I want to carry on. I want to carry on making some really decent content, and thank every single one of you for watching my videos, liking and, you know, sharing them and things like that. It makes a massive difference for me, and I'm really stoked. I'm really stoked with all the really good feedback I've been getting and just the positive stuff. It's really awesome. So hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.